Guest workers demonstrate against appalling working and living conditions they endured during what was billed as a cultural exchange program. But are they in fact getting a fairly accurate picture of conditions for millions of US workers? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. They were brought here as guests but treated like slaves. That's the accusation being made by more than a dozen guest workers based in Pennsylvania who on Thursday took their campaign to New York's Times Square. They're part of the estimated 100,000 students entering the US each year on J-class visas, a system that's intended to be part work and part cultural exchange. But labour rights campaigners say the system is being exploited by companies simply looking for cheap labour. In this latest case, students say they were underpaid and forced to live in overpriced, crowded housing. The only culture they've been exposed to is the inside of a McDonald's. And they're not the first to complain. In August of 2011, around 400 guest workers walked out of a warehouse run by a Hershey's subcontractor, also in Pennsylvania. A few months later, a criminal gang was found to have used J-1 visas to hire Eastern European women to work in a strip club. Both the State Department and the Labour Department have launched separate investigations into this guest worker program, even as a bipartisan Senate group recently appeared to recommend expanding similar temporary work programs as part of US immigration reform. Al Jazeera spoke with one of the McDonald's guest workers who told us his story.
My name is Jorge Victor Rios. I'm 27 years old. I'm from Argentina, and I'm one of the students who participated in this, what is supposed to be a cultural exchange program. We paid in total $3,000 to participate in this program. We came to the United States in December and started working for McDonald's on the 18th of December, in my case. We were put to live in an unfinished basement, up to 8 of us living in these places, sleeping on bunk beds that moved and squeaked. And these houses where they put us in their basements, all of them were owned by our own employer. So our employer was also our landlord.
McDonald's must pay!
Out of the 40 hours that we were supposed to work according to the contract, we had different problems. In my case, I was given too few hours, so I had to be on call for them in order to work more hours and be able to pay the rent and make some money to buy groceries. In other cases, other students were forced to work a lot, double and triple shifts, also on call, but they were forced to work a lot more than they should. So they started having health problems, emotional problems because of that. At the beginning, I was scared to complain. On occasions, they would say, you know that we are a phone call away from sending you back home. Because the way this program is designed, they do have that power. The State Department designed this program as part of their diplomacy policies, the United States foreign policies. So it's supposed to create friendly bonds between the United States and other countries. But they put all the responsibility on the sponsors, and the sponsors are enterprises. The sponsor is business-oriented. They are interested in making money. I wanted to see what it was like to live here, to experience life in the United States. But definitely we were not expecting to experience that aspect of American culture, which has to do with exploitation. Workers from everywhere, they are sending us, however they can, they send us messages supporting us. They said, your story is millions of American workers' stories, only that they don't have a chance to say it like you have now.
And joining me to discuss the US's guest worker programs are, from New York, Josh Idelson, a former union organizer himself who writes on labor issues for The Nation magazine. Here in the studio, Alex Norasta, an immigration policy analyst from the Cato Institute, and Saket Soni. He's the Executive Director of the National Guest Worker Alliance. That's the organisation that helped these students organise. Josh, first of all, though, it's a day after that demonstration in Times Square. It seems there have been results.
Well, just a few minutes after chanting workers were escorted by police out of the Times Square McDonald's, I received an email from McDonald's corporate saying that they have cut off their ties with Andy Chung, the franchisee who's alleged to have subjected these workers to substandard working conditions, to substandard living conditions, to having people working 25 hours in a row. The company has said that those stores will be sold by Chung to new franchisees.
And we also have this statement that was released by McDonald's on Thursday, quote, "We take the well-being of the employees working in McDonald's restaurants seriously. We began investigating the situation in Pennsylvania immediately upon learning of the issues involved. The franchisee has agreed to leave the McDonald's system. We are also working on connecting with the guest workers on an individual basis to most effectively address this situation. Finally, we are providing information to franchisees who may participate in the guest worker program to ensure they understand both the letter and spirit of all the requirements of the State Department J-1 visa program, as well as the expectations for full compliance by McDonald's." So that sounds hopeful. And I suppose we have to remember, Saket Soni, I mean, this wasn't simply about Andy Chung there. There were other demands too, though, about the working conditions in the McDonald's.
That's right, that's right. This is really a story about McDonald's. It's really a story about how this is one more company that has hijacked this guest worker program to its own ends, to bring in cheap labor and have a practically captive workforce working in the stores. The students are demanding that McDonald's take responsibility for what happens within its franchise, that McDonald's pay attention to labor standards and labor conditions and sit down and have a discussion about labor standards in McDonald's. And they're demanding that Andy Chung and the recruiter be barred from future J-1 program.
Right, I mean, actually, was that made clear to you, Josh? I mean, is that the case? I mean, I know, actually, another thing that happened, actually, earlier, he had stepped down from the board of the Ronald McDonald House charity, which is probably not a bad idea given the living conditions of some of these students. But have there been any other firm sanctions on future eligibility for J-1 and things like that?
So McDonald's declined to elaborate further on its relationship with Chung or what will happen to his stores beyond saying that he's no longer in their system and his stores will be sold to other franchisees. McDonald's also, when I asked them whether they would ensure that workers are paid for any wages that they were denied, whether the company would enter into an agreement or negotiations with workers or with the National Guest Worker Alliance about how it will more effectively oversee the use and abuse, potentially, of guest workers within its supply chain. What McDonald's has said is that they will make some member of management available, and again, as that statement said, that they intend to individually address issues with workers. What they have not agreed to do is to have their CEO meet with workers or to negotiate with these workers who are witnesses to these conditions about how a company that has thousands of franchisees can demonstrate that it actually doesn't want those franchisees to turn a profit on the backs of workers making below the minimum wage.
And in the meantime, there are going to be more demonstrations. Is that correct, Josh?
Yes, the workers are in Philadelphia and heading to D.C., where they'll be meeting with legislators about what this means for comprehensive immigration reform. They've given McDonald's CEO a March 25th deadline to meet, and assuming that he doesn't show up for their invitation, they will be demonstrating on the 26th, first at McDonald's headquarters in Chicago, and then at his personal home.
I mean, there have been examples of this sort of abuse of the J-1 program over the years. We have a few examples. I mean, this isn't the first time the State Department itself has faced criticism for its oversight. Back in August 2011, at least 400 students from around the world who were in the US on J-1 visas walked off their jobs at a Hershey chocolate factory in Pennsylvania. They said they faced abusive work conditions. The Labor Department launched an investigation and found gross violations. The students also won back $200,000 in unpaid wages. In December of 2011, a lawsuit alleged that J-1 visas were being used by the mafia to bring Eastern European women into the US and forcing them to work in strip clubs. They'd often been promised other jobs. In December 2010, an Associated Press investigation uncovered a series of abuses faced by students on the visas. Among their findings, students who made $1 an hour after deductions for housing and other expenses, and others who had to, quote, hot bunk and sleep in shifts. The State Department then launched its own investigation into the program and implemented reforms to the program, such as refining the type of jobs students can have and strengthening, though, the, quote, cultural aspects of the program. Saket, when did your union get involved with this in this program, and what sort of examples have you seen?
Well, you know, the Hershey example that you named is a prime example. These are students like the McDonald's students who were recruited from all over the world for a cultural exchange program. They came for a cultural exchange program, wanting to learn about American culture. In a sad way, they got a glimpse into American culture. You know, the way that workplace abuse runs rampant, the way that employers can, with impunity, mistreat workers, and most importantly, the way that the large employers and large corporations have really abandoned responsibility for their employees. In the Hershey's case, Hershey claimed that the students weren't their employees. The students were lying at the bottom of a factory floor under 4 layers of subcontracting, where Hershey subcontracted to Excel to SHS, and so on. In the McDonald's case, McDonald's uses its entire franchisee system, again, to distance itself from the workers. In each case, we've found that workers are demanding that the top of the food chain take responsibility. And meanwhile, the CEOs of McDonald's and Hershey's and other corporations are saying, well, we'll deal with the franchisee or the supplier, but we won't deal with the students collectively.
Right, and that's what's so fascinating about that structure of power and delegation as to how it actually relates to the U.S. labor market as a whole, and we'll get into that a bit later. But first of all, we did put some of the complaints to the U.S. State Department. This is their response to Al Jazeera's questions about the allegations.
In 2012, we had a total of 91,600 participants, the vast majority of whom had a very good experience with this program. But there have been problems. We have been working on them. Let me give you a sense of what we've been doing. We've been working over the past year to strengthen our regulations, to enhance the program's health and safety protections for participants. This includes, among other things, more closely vetting the type of jobs that they're eligible for, including vetting every single job and every single employer, including overnight hours, prohibiting jobs in isolated areas, and ensuring proper housing and transportation. We've also done a lot to improve the information and access participants have to us so that they know how to get in direct contact with us if there are problems of any kind, including through a 24-hour helpline and through regular department monitoring of all placements through the course of the program. So this is an ongoing effort on our part to ensure that those who come here for this program are not only safe and secure, but have a terrific experience.
So that led to some follow-up questions. The State Department spokesperson was asked exactly how the State Department knew that the vast majority of people in this program had a positive experience, and here's the exchange that followed.
You said that the vast majority of the more than 91,000 kids had a very good experience. How do you know that?
Because we do exit interviews with them, and we do follow up.
It's not just that the vast majority didn't complain.
No,
they actually said, check the box, or said, I had a great time last summer.
This is another one of the things that we're doing to strengthen the program is much tougher exit interviewing and follow-up with participants.
Every single participant is interviewed at the end?
I don't know whether we, the State Department, get to every participant, but certainly the sponsors that we work with have to get to every participant, and we monitor them ourselves in terms of spot contacts.
So it's the sponsor, so it could be one of these, it could be one of these, as Ross said, unscrupulous people who's doing the exit interview?
Again, we are also monitoring the records of the sponsors, as we talked about last year.
The ever-tenacious Matt Lee of Associated Press. Josh Idelson, I mean, that's the point there. What sort of oversight does the State Department have over this program? How concerned have they been?
Well, I'd note that when I spoke to the CEO of the sponsoring organization, in this case, GeoVisions, he cast aspersion on the workers' allegations, implied that they might be untrue, and he specifically noted that Andy Chung had always received very positive evaluations. So either you can conclude from that that workers just made this up, or this year was different.
But hang
or
on,
you
who's
can conclude
so
that
has the State Department, much in the way that McDonald's does in its normal labour practice, have they basically outsourced this program to middlemen and contractors then? And GeoVisions is one of those contractors.
Well, that interview suggests that part of how the State Department determines if the program is working is these evaluations, and if Andy Chung is doing well on these evaluations, we should be concerned. What the workers have also alleged, though, is that indeed the State Department subcontracts its own responsibilities to the sponsors, and in this case, one of the most disturbing parts of the story is when one of the workers contacted the State Department. The result was, according to the workers, that the State Department contacted GeoVisions, the sponsor, and GeoVisions had a representative go with Andy Chung, the franchisee who was responsible for all of these alleged abuses. And the two of them, an official from the sponsor and Andy Chung, showed up in one of these basements where the workers were living, and Andy Chung started yelling at the workers.
That's right. That's right. It's an example of the fox guarding the hen house, if that's the correct expression.
Right.
I mean, these sponsors have incentives. The State Department either has, forgotten what those incentives are or is really misreading them. The sponsoring organizations are going to be interviewing the students, and they're more interested.
Is there
in
any
the
evidence, though,
future
that,
work.
as the State Department suggests, though, that this is just a small minority of people there? I mean, I guess the problem is partly we don't have the exit interview, so
Well,
we
there's
don't know.
no way to know.
And if people complain, they get punished.
Well, what we do know is that the mechanisms are there to suppress complaint and to retaliate. If a student were to complain about Andy Chung, as a student certainly did in this case, there was a knock on the door and there was Andy Chung with the sponsor by his side.
Right.
At the exit interview, that student is going to be thinking, if I complain, then will it hurt my ability to come back to the U.S.? Will this get to Andy Chung? Will this get to the State Department?
I mean, beyond the McDonald's workers, I mean, does your union reach out to the other workers?
Our organization has reached out for years to workers on all of these different visa categories.
So are you able to keep track of all
And
this?
absolutely, in far more cases than in not, workers are deeply afraid of retaliation.
Alex and Rasto, I mean, it's not a bad idea then to mention quickly, I mean, the benefits for McDonald's and others in hiring these guest workers are pretty great as well. I mean, it's pretty profitable for them.
Yeah, and I think the more important question, though, is why are McDonald's using the J visa to hire low-skilled workers to work in restaurants? And the answer to that question is that this country does not have a low-skilled guest worker visa program to bring in people from abroad with the knowledge that they're going to be working in these types of industries, they're going to be working hard in these types of industries, they're not being fooled into it by thinking it's a cultural exchange program. We just don't have that kind of visa.
Just be honest that this is cheap bonded labor.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's just be honest that what this country needs is cheap labor from abroad to come in and work on this, and let's create a guest worker visa program that allows for workers to come in legally instead of going through this whole mess where people get lied to and get a lot of their wages taken away.
As we mentioned earlier in the program, guest workers programs have now become a feature in the immigration reform debate, but surely they're completely open to this sort of abuse, though, aren't they?
Well, one of the important things that these programs need is something called portability. We need to empower workers to protect themselves. The best protection against an abusive employer is the ability to quit, its ability to change your job. Now, as the programs are structured, and as this one is structured, is if you quit your job, you can get deported immediately. They should have the same protections that you or I or anybody else has, which is you can quit and find a new job. And that's a problem with too much government oversight, too much government regulation, too much government control in the economy.
That's what this Cato Institute believes. I mean, doesn't it require regulation to ensure that there is visa portability and indeed, living wage and other factors?
Well, you hand them a piece of paper, the worker, that says you can work here in the United States, and you let them find the employer that they want, and if they have a problem, they can leave and they can find another employer. I mean, the notion that bureaucrats can come in from afar and determine exactly these sort of situations and punish employers perfectly is silly. The people who know they're being exploited are the workers themselves. We need to empower them to change their own circumstances without legal punishment.
So, I mean, there is this issue of guest workers and how they should be incorporated into the US labor system. And traditionally, the unions haven't been terribly happy about such programs because they argue, what's normally a right-wing kind of rallying cry that immigrants drive down wages. Is that correct?
Well, what drives down wages is any segregation of the labor market where there's an underclass of workers without rights who can be paid $1 to $5 an hour, who can be retaliated against, and can never organize to lift wages and working conditions. That doesn't have to be immigrant labor, but yes, when there are 11 million people in this country, plus all the guest workers, another million, who essentially are a deportable workforce, then absolutely.
So then in the discussions of guest worker programs that you've heard, Saket, so far, has there been any discussion then of making sure that any guest workers are paid the same amount as US workers, have the same rights of guest workers as native workers, to ensure that there isn't this ability of corporations to exploit one and divide and rule?
We absolutely think that, workers need to be able to have, no matter how many workers come to the US, and whether they are here for 36 hours or 36 days or 36 years, when they are here, they need to have not only the same rights as an American worker, but they need to work with those American workers to organize and lift wages and working conditions.
Now, I have a feeling, Alex, that's not what you had in mind when you talk about guest worker programs. That actually, you raise all boats. You don't actually have one set of workers who are treated considerably worse than US workers and have corporations that be able to be in a position to exploit that workforce.
No, we absolutely don't want corporations to be, or anybody in the situation to be able to exploit workers. What the situation, though, that is created is we know workers are going to come no matter what. We know they're going to come legally, they're going to come illegally. If we don't have a workable visa, they're going to come illegally, they're going to live and work in the black market, and the situations that he described are much more common in the black market. What we need to do is create a legal way to bring it all above board.
Yes, but does that mean that guest workers it should be a requirement that guest workers have the ability to organize, they have labor protections, that they are not paid a below minimum wage, and so forth, so that corporations can't use those conditions then to threaten native workers, with either not hiring them or forcing them to reduce their standards?
Sure. Well, I want to go on the record by saying that I'm against minimum wages for everybody, Americans and foreigners. But I absolutely think that guest workers should be able to unionize if it's voluntary, if it's not a closed shop. They should absolutely be given that choice. But the most important thing is they should just be able to leave if they want to without the government punishing them. And that's the thing that's sort of not being said as much in this discussion, is that the person who is going to be punishing these workers the most is the government by deporting them if they break this contract. We need to remove that threat and allow these workers to protect themselves.
Josh Idelson, I wonder, returning to this theme of cultural exchange that the State Department was trying to foster, is there that sense then, unwittingly, they have facilitated that this is the sort of labour model, what the students experienced is the sort of labour model that is how an increasing number of Americans find themselves in. And it's also a labour model that's favoured by politicians and the corporations who sponsor them, especially when they talk about issues such as worker competitiveness.
Well, one of these strikers said to me, I got no cultural exchange at McDonald's, but I've gotten a lot of cultural exchange since I went on strike. And in fact, the conditions, we often don't talk about the conditions of guest workers. When we do, they're often talked about as a dirty little secret. But the truth is, what's happening to guest workers reflects a lot about what's happening to work in the United States. In terms of precarity, the decline of security, let alone a union contract. We've seen a decline just in having a sense of when your hours are and how long you can stay in that job. There's been what I call the who's the boss problem, where increasingly the company that controls your working conditions doesn't sign your paycheck, which makes it harder to hold them accountable. And we've seen how American labor law is creaky and craven and fails to actually vindicate workers' rights to force their employer to sit across the table with them and negotiate. And so historically in the United States, faced with these challenges, workers haven't just left. The garment industry in the United States didn't stop being a sweatshop industry because workers exercised their option to go to a different garment sweatshop. It changed because workers stayed and organized. That is what the fact that guest workers are doing that now, despite all of these challenges, is a sign of hope, but it's shameful that the US government does not do more to protect those rights and to make it so that illegally retaliating and terrorizing workers comes at a price.
Josh Idelson, thank you very much. Alex Norasta, thank you. Saket Soni, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.